Welcome to another episode of Tory Talks. I'm Sam Murray. This is Councillor Ian Fisher, and today's date is the 14th of November. So, Ian, how are you?
I'm very well, thank you. I'm very well. Can I just say, as it's the 14th of November, I'd like to wish two people a happy birthday today. Can you guess who they are?
No.
Okay, so the first is Prince Charles. It's Prince Charles's birthday.
Oh, yeah, I knew it was
today.
Prince Charles' birthday, actually.
Happy birthday, Prince Charles. And the second is my sister. That's her 50th birthday today. So happy birthday, my sister.
Wow, big.
Not that she'll be, not that I doubt she'll be watching Tory Talks, but there you go. Is that a JRM mug you've got there?
Yeah, it's a Jacob Rees mug.
And is it actually signed?
Well, no, it's got the print of his signature.
Oh, right, okay.
It was a Christmas present last year.
Okay. I was going to say, how much did you pay for that? But you didn't pay for it, did you?
No, it was a Christmas present.
Yeah, cool. A Jacob Rees mug.
Yeah.
Yeah. So what are we talking about today then, Miss Murray?
So we were going to talk about the US elections because we can't really avoid not talking about it. But we have to sort of mention, I'm guessing, everything that's happening very briefly. So we've got Lockdown 2.0 we're going through and Cumgate 2.0. Your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean... Well, you know my thoughts on a lockdown. I've said it many times. Don't believe in them. Don't believe they work. Don't really believe that we had necessarily had the numbers to push for a second lockdown. I do worry about what we're actually trying to achieve with these lockdowns. And then on a more local level, I had a call from the chief exec of the borough council on Thursday to tell me that, on Wednesday evening, to tell me that the borough council were going to lead a communications campaign because they were worried about rising cases in Ipswich. So obviously I drilled down into him. Basically, we've got 4 wards in Ipswich that appear above the 130 per 100,000, which is some kind of limit set somewhere. But we have 12 wards in Ipswich that don't. So what I said, yeah, okay, I'm all in favour of a communications campaign. I said, but I think it's very important to make sure that people of Ipswich know that this problem is centred around a few areas and it's not one that is across the borough. I said, because you don't want to give the wrong impression and we really don't want to scare people. So I was the lone dissenting voice in that, and lo and behold, the Borough Council have come out with a campaign to that Ipswich is above the COVID national rates, and that if we don't do this, we're going to go into a heavier tier of lockdown when this lockdown is finished. They haven't even bothered to mention the fact that there are only a few very sparsely populated areas of Ipswich where the problem is higher than the average, and they haven't obviously put any explanation on it whatsoever. And now the people of Ipswich are all probably worried, thinking that Ipswich is a hotbed of COVID when it clearly isn't. And my worry is that they think that they can scare people into doing what they want, but it actually has completely the opposite effect. And I'm desperately trying on social media to dispel some of the rumours that go with this, but obviously I'm the lone dissenting voice, and the local paper has got no interest in printing any kind of sensible opinion pieces on this, and they're just a mouthpiece for the local borough council, really. And so, yeah, I'm a bit disappointed in the last few days, but there you go.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely not like the first lockdown. Well, for me, I'm less scared. And just even being on the road, we've got the signs obviously saying no essential, only essential travel, blah, blah, blah. There are so many more people on the roads. I mean, one day I just thought, I don't even remember ever seeing this many cars on the road. And, obviously with the schools being open, one of the teachers said to me, what is going on this time? Do you think it's because the schools are open? And, you know, the teachers that I've spoken to at my children's school are adamant to stay open as well. So that, you know, we're doing everything we can to keep these schools open. They understand the importance of keeping schools open. But it's almost like if you're going to have a mass gathering outside of school to drop your kids off, then it all seems a little bit... The only people that are being affected is, you know, the gyms and pubs and that kind of stuff, because everyone else is just getting on with their lives. So it's, you know, are we really, all we're doing is ruining hospitality in my view right now. And there's, you know, there's a couple of pubs that have made massive expense, you know, they've made big investments on outdoor facilities and tents and everything else to make sure that they're COVID secure. And then now we're in this second lockdown, and it's just like, why did they spend all that money? It seems a bit pointless for hospitality. I think we need to get rid of the whole COVID secure and COVID safe phrasing, because if things were COVID secure, then they'd stay open. So I want to get rid of wrapping our arms around the country, because if you can't wrap your arms around your gran, then why are we using that phrase? I want to get rid of COVID secure and COVID safe. They're the three phrases of this year I want to get rid of, because they're stupid. But yeah, it doesn't feel like a lockdown in my eyes.
Well, it's not. It's not. I suppose the only reason that you're saying that is because you're comparing it to the last one. You know, there are severe restrictions in place on people. It isn't like the last one. You're going to have more traffic on the roads, simply because, I mean, one thing this does do is highlight just how much traffic on the roads is caused by schools. But the secondly is work. You know, there was a big push last time for people not to go to work, for places to be closed, to only work if you had to. Whereas now, the push is completely the opposite. So it is a different type of lockdown. You know, we will see. I will just about put up with it if it does finish when it's supposed to finish. But realistically, you know, let's see what those numbers, what happens with those numbers over a couple of weeks. You know, we could have 4 or 5 episodes of Tory Talks just on COVID, so let's not let it take over. But I think, you know, we will see where we'll be in a couple of weeks' time, and then we should make more comment. But obviously, things in the last 48 hours have been overtaken by the Cummings and Kane affair. Yeah. To be honest, although you know me, I'm politically active, it's not something that registers that highly on my radar. Lee Kane, for example, for somebody like myself who considers themselves to be very politically active and quite politically knowledgeable, I'd never even heard the guy's name before. Never, ever. I heard his name mentioned once before in anything, so he couldn't have been that important. So I'm not that bothered about him going. Cummings, you're never really too sure whether he's actually gone or not. He was going to be gone by Christmas anyway. Yeah. You could be a conspiracy theorist and say, oh, he's gone. That means he's gone because we're going to collapse on Brexit and give the EU what they want, and that's why he's gone. Or you've got the other side of the argument saying he's gone because we've got what we want on Brexit and his job's finished. And then you've got the third side of the argument saying he's pretending he's gone, but he's actually working from home. And I'll be honest with you, we'll probably never find out the truth. But he is exactly what it says on the tin. He's a special advisor to the Prime Minister, and they come and go. They come and go quite often. He's not elected, so I'm not that bothered. About it. I'll be bothered if something happens with Brexit, but that's a completely different matter. It was quite illuminating that he left out of the front door when nobody else does, so it kind of like leads me to believe that he wasn't sacked. If he was sacked, he'd have been told to go out the back door. Yeah. He still must have retained some power to be able to opt to go out of the front door with his case. And then obviously the Twitter post last night from Mr. Mason Mills of him leaving, of Dominic Cummings leaving 10 Downing Street, and with a caption saying, question, what's in the box? Answer, the Brexit you all voted for. Now, does that mean that he's left successfully, or that the Brexit is gone, or is he just playing with us all? You never know. Let's wait and see. I'm not that, I don't mind Dominic Cummings. He's not the be all and end all of Brexit. So let's just wait and see what happens.
That tweet, there was a subsequent tweet from Mr. Mason Mills, who is he, that said that the Brexit deal has left with Cummings. So he put a second tweet out, which basically indicated that the deal that what we voted for has gone with Cummings. So that's kind of put Brexiteers, I think, into overdrive of what's going to happen. But you're right, we will never know. The Cummings affair is very bizarre, though, isn't it? Because I've never known a time where a special advisor has had the press conference that he had over his eye, Aston, and now leaving out the front door. Like you say, they come and go. Why is he getting all this?
There's been plenty of similar things. To be honest, the reason that you'll probably think that this has got more traction than others is probably because of social media. A lot of Brexit supporters are quite active on social media, so are painting this as something bigger than what. And actually, special advisors come and go. There's been some controversial ones involved in the past, and the reason why you probably can't think of many is because that's exactly what happens. They come, they go. There's a little bit of furore around they go, and then 2 months later, everybody's forgotten about them because usually they're not as focused on a single issue as Cummings was. But over the years, there's been plenty of special advisors that have come and gone. I'm sure Cameron had an issue with one that was quite high profile. Was that Gavin Barwell was certainly a high profile special advisor that left. I think he was Theresa May. But yeah, they come and go. Think Alistair Campbell.
Well, I was going to ask about Alistair Campbell because of obviously our age difference. I know of him, and obviously I was aware of him at the time, but I was quite young, so I wasn't. Did he ever do any press conferences, or is he just known because of?
So no. Alistair Campbell was the Labour movement, really. Yeah. He was probably the first, what you'd class as non-elected person that seemed to wield more power than a lot of elected people. But because I suppose a lot of that was because a lot of the style of the Blair government was communication, and it was the first one where they used the mass media, as it were. And bear in mind that originally he was the press secretary, so he wielded a lot of power and a lot of influence, and he was elected. He was hated by some sections of the Labour Party, just the same way as Cummings is hated by sections of the Conservatives. There's two people that you could probably align their political careers quite closely together, but there's two people that probably you won't find two people that are more diametrically opposed as those two are. They probably hate each other, but actually when you dial down into it, they've both done pretty similar things. The difference being that Alistair Campbell was a dyed-in-the-wool Labour person. I couldn't really tell you if Cummings holds any conservative values at all. He was let's not forget that he had been a special advisor to government before. I think with Gove. And somebody else before that. So, special advisors don't always necessarily hold the same political opinions as the people they're advising. They're just good at advising. So, no, Cummings certainly wasn't the first. He certainly won't be the last. But you have to remember that because he's involved in the Brexit polarising debate, there's going to be probably more people that come out and say they hate Cummings than did with Alistair Campbell.
Yeah, fair enough. So, big topic, presidential election. So, I don't think...
Or otherwise known as the shit show that was the presidential election.
Well, yeah, I don't think I fully appreciated, because when I've just not been this interested in American politics before. And so I'm kind of learning as I go along. And I said to you, didn't I? I said, I'm going to have a Zoom election party. We're going to stay up. And I thought it was going to be like the British way, where you get the exit poll and then you pretty much know what's going on, stay up for a little bit of the results. I mean, obviously we were at the count for our election, so we stayed up all night. But I thought it was going to be like that. We'll have a bit of a chat. I messed around dressed as Trump for a joke and thought it would be a bit of a laugh. What actually happened is we stayed up till 3, realised that we're not going to find out the results for weeks, and I just deprived myself of sleep.
So, I think that I think you probably match yourself with a lot of other people. And one of the weird things about this presidential election this time is that, believe it or not, it's not actually that much different to what always happens. It's not a million miles different. US elections are totally different to ours anyway. They report them in a different way. But yeah, I mean, if you look back through history, and I think I'm right in saying this, there was a period of time, I think it was the beginning of this current week, where there were about 330 ongoing lawsuits concerning the election. Now, that was not all the presidential election, because obviously we had elections for Congress, elections for Senate, but also we had elections to what's the equivalent of their district and town councils. We had elections for that as well. So they have a lot of elections on the same day. Sounds like loads of lawsuits, but we have to remember America is a country that loves its lawsuits. But to put it into context, I believe there were about 370 lawsuits in the last presidential election in 2016. So there are actually more lawsuits last time than this time. It just so happens that a lot of them this time are actually more concerning the presidential election rather than the non-presidential one. Let's just remember as well, and I think it's possible for us to talk about this without having to side with anybody. But if we just remember, for all those that are absolutely castigating Donald Trump for not conceding the election, that we don't have to look too far back in history to find something pretty similar with Al Gore and George Bush in the year 2000. I think it was 2000, when Al Gore was the president-elect until the middle of December. And he's announced himself as the winner, and people were congratulating him, and he never ended up being president. I think it was 30 odd days that the man was president-elect for, and then there was a court case in Florida where the Supreme Court deemed that George Bush had won Florida, and so George Bush became the president-elect about 30 days after this happening. So it's not without precedence. I don't know enough about individual lawsuits to know whether it's true or not. But I think the one thing that it does do is highlight what a pathetically bad system they actually operate. Because what I've been saying to a lot of people on social media, regardless of what political persuasion you are, is that if you have a system where it's possible to allege abuse so easily, then the system is not good. Because if you can allege abuse, then it's going to happen all the time. It's very difficult to, in our elections, because we have much tighter deadlines and we have a completely different way of counting things, it's very difficult to allege abuse. So obviously when somebody comes out and says that it was an unfair election, you tend to disbelieve them straight away. Whereas it's not possible to do that with the American system.
Well, there's lots of things that I just thought was a bit bonkers. So I've got a friend in America, and I was explaining how we do it here, and he was like, that totally makes sense. But, I didn't understand. I was watching, and I watched several different channels, because if we thought the media was biased there, you can tell who they're supporting through the channels. It's incredible to watch. But, they were saying 20% of the ballots has been counted, and this is the result so far. And it's like, We don't do any of that. We wait until it's all done and verified, and then we announce the result. We don't say, okay, 20% of them have been counted and Therese is maybe one, because you just don't know what's coming in.
Yeah, but if you think about that, we do it, we just don't announce it. So you and I have been to several counts, whether that be for a local ward in the borough elections or an MP or a count in a general election. And okay, so the first box is opened. You know a little bit about the demographics of the area where the ballot box is from. So you know what to expect from that area. So it is possible. Let's face it. You and I, a ward election is a real good one to do. So when there's a borough election, we're electing for 16 wards. Being the group leader, I keep an eye on each one of the wards. Somebody opens the first box. We think to ourselves, cool, do you know what? If we can get 50% of this box, we're doing quite well. You have a look over the count. You work out, I think looking at the count here, we've got about 60% of this box. Now, you then turn around to your colleagues and say, look, if we've got 60% of this box, we've won this ward easy. So you then go and concentrate in another area to count that. But we do that amongst ourselves.
Yeah.
You would never have enough guts to proclaim that as a result. But we do that analysis amongst ourselves. We just keep it to ourselves.
Yeah,
so it's no different. But the difference is that in this country, we don't declare any numbers until the count is finished. That's different in America. But just remember that it's almost impossible to align the two systems. America is a grouping of 52 different countries. People forget about that because they call them states. In essence, they're 52 different countries that have got the power to set their own election rules. So we'll choose a state. Let's choose Georgia as a state, only because it's got a recount. So Georgia, the state officials in Georgia are interested in the election in Georgia. They're not interested in the election in North Carolina or Idaho or Montana. Their job is the election in Georgia. So, and Georgia is made up of several counties. So the counties are similar to our constituencies, in as much as one county, a bit like Sunderland, one county might declare at 2 hours after the ballot's finished. Another county that's in a very, very rural area might not declare it for 2 or 3 days. And we release those results, so we let people know that Labour have won Sunderland South before we know the result of the election in general. That's only in essence what they're doing in the States. So a certain county has declared its results. That doesn't mean that we know the result in Georgia. And think a county, think a constituency, think Georgia, think the UK as a whole. So a county in Georgia releases its results. That's the same as a constituency in the UK releasing its results. That doesn't mean we know the result of Georgia, but if Sunderland South declares if you remember, think back to the last election when Sunderland South came out as a Labour seat, but their majority was slashed by like about 80%. We all knew then that it was pretty much going to be a good night for the Conservatives. Okay, so the same in Georgia. You've got a seat that's solidly Democrat, a county that's solidly Democrat, and that might vote Republican. So they think, okay, well, the rest of Georgia is going to do the same then. So in a way, it's very easy to look at your own system and say, oh, it's so much better than theirs. But in essence, it's not that much different. The difference being that the American TV networks pronounce things as fact and don't do enough of, look, this is a single result on a night, it could be an anomaly. So when you're looking at the first set of results, quite often a state will declare one way or the other when it's only got 50 or 60% of the results in. But that might be because it's a safe, solid seat, and it's unlikely that but they're not really declaring. The state hasn't declared the result. The media has declared the result.
This is it. I mean, I was watching BBC at one point. This was really early doors, and it was saying Trump's got 11 points and Biden's got 5 points. And then you go on to CNN, and then it's Biden's got 17 points and Trump's got 3 points. And you just think, and it's so like each channel had completely different results, and you're just like, from an outsider, you're thinking, what the hell is going on? Because we just get them coming through.
The one thing that does make it difficult, obviously, in this country, for people that are unaware in this country, obviously we have an election day, and the majority of people in this country vote in person on the day. We do have postal ballots, what the Americans call mail-in ballots. The main difference here, and this is where I think a lot of the confusion comes, with a postal ballot in the UK, there is a deadline to return your postal votes by. And on that deadline, the day after, was mostly the day after, sometimes the same day, representatives from all the parties concerned are invited into the count area. Those postal ballots are opened. They're not counted. They are opened and they're verified. As in, the number of votes is verified, and spoiled ballots, or anybody would spoil a postal ballot, are taken apart. But no count is made. But they're verified, so we know the number of counts. They are then counted on election night. Okay, but we do allow postal ballots. If you've applied for a postal ballot and you've missed a deadline, we do allow you to post it or to deliver it to either your local election centre or the local count centre on the day of the election. But those postal ballots are all counted at exactly the same time as other ballot boxes. So when you're watching the count, the box is brought out, they say to you, oh, this is postal ballots, or they'll say to you, this is this polling area, this is that polling area, so you know what you're looking at. So it's very difficult to allege fraud.
Yeah, and they're counted in front of all of us, aren't they? So they're counted in front of every party that,
So the only allegation of fraud, really, and this, even then, if I point out now, it's very difficult to allege, is that the postal ballots are verified and a number is given. So let's say there's 10,000 postal votes. They're then sealed again in a ballot box until election day, which is only 2 or 3 days away. Somebody could allege that there's tampering between them being sealed in the ballot box and they're not. But the ballot boxes are sealed and they're signed. Okay, you know what number of votes are in there. So when that ballot box gets counted on the night, being a poll watcher, you can check and ask that the number of ballots counted, the number of ballots counted will always have to equal the number that have been verified. So if they say there's 10,000 and they count them, and the blue team has got 5,000 and the red team has got 5,010, meaning there's 10,010 votes, they know there's an issue. They know there's a problem because there's only 10,000 votes. So they will recount. Now, the difficulty with the states seems to be that individual states in America have the ability to set their own rules amongst when they do the counting. And this is when a lot of the problem comes in. A lot of the states changed their rules in the run-up to the election. One of the reasons this has caused problems is because most of the states have got new rules for mail-in balloting this year to usual, because the numbers have increased so drastically because of the pandemic.
Yeah.
So it's almost as though this is a system that it's a perfect storm for a problem, because this is a system where we knew it was going to be a contested election anyway, but you've got a system that's never been tried before. So it's always, you've got states where they've allowed counting of the ballots 3 or 4 days after the election's finished. You've got states that have allowed mail-in ballots to be mailed to them 5 or 6 days after the election's finished. There are a number of anomalies in the states, or there are a number of systems in the states which leave themselves open to allegations of fraud. Now, if they leave themselves open to allegations of fraud, somebody that is a sore loser is always going to allege fraud because you're allowing them to.
Yeah. Yeah.
But the mere fact that 20 years ago when George Bush won based on the fact that the Supreme Court made some decisions based on the Florida election, and he ended up winning Florida by 537 votes. Okay, but it was the Supreme Court that decided that, not the poll clerk or the election clerk of Florida state, because there's all this confusion around ballots, when they're counted, when they're not counted. And like I say, the system, the one thing that should come out of this, realistically, is that the system is changed. Regardless of whether you want Trump to win or Biden to win, the system stinks. It absolutely stinks. And I don't know how any American can sit there and be happy that their system works, because it doesn't.
Yeah. Yeah. And I used to, I must admit, the first time I went to account with us, I thought, this is so old fashioned. This is so archaic. This is so ridiculous and all this. And then now I'm like, okay, it works relatively well. It's going to be very difficult to, I'm going to sneeze. It's going to be very difficult to, beat the system as such. And so, yeah, I appreciate it a lot more now that I've seen the shit show that's gone overseas.
Well, I think don't forget, with the Americans being a republic, it's made complicated by the fact that they allow, probably rightly so, because they're 52 individual states, 52 or 51, 52, I think, because they allow them to have different rules. We have rules for an election that cover the whole election. So what we do in Ipswich for a general election is the same as what they do in Sunderland, is the same as what they, Ipswich as a seat is the same as Mid Suffolk as a seat, is the same as Cardiff South as a seat, is the same as every other seat, is done in exactly the same way. But I think the bipartisan way of American politics is also a bit weird and wonderful, because you tend to know, because they register themselves as political supporters as well. So you tend to know that some of the people counting the votes are registered for a certain party, which, the way we've got, Russell Williams, the chief executive of the Ipswich Borough Council, he's the monitoring officer for the election. And I don't think anybody would know where his political allegiance lies. But the problem with American politics, with the way the American system works, is that the people that are in positions of power like that are all political rather than a civil service, as it were. Yeah. So their political allegiance. Whereas in this country, if you work for the civil service, are you going to be involved in the count? You're not allowed to state your political opinion. If I knew that Russell had a leaning towards socialism, why wouldn't I call out a count? Because if I'd won, if the socialists had won, of course you would. So, is it free and fair? I'm not too sure. Why does it take so long for them to count their votes? I don't know. Is it more complicated than what it needs to be? Of course it is.
Yeah.
Will we get an answer that you can really... let's face it, when this boils down to it, when this finishes and there's a winner and a loser, I can pretty much guarantee that the American public, if they're on the losing side, are not going to accept the result. Full stop. So I do think it's a difficult time for American politics, but in which case that makes it a difficult time for world politics. But it certainly doesn't look good for democracy, and it certainly doesn't look good if you're one of these people across the world who thinks that America is the leader of the free world, because they're not going anyway to showing how you should hold free and fair elections.
I agree. The only thing I do respect about it is the fact that come rain or shine, they will have an election on that fixed day. And nothing is going to stop them from doing that.
I don't know if nothing has stopped them in the past. I don't know if wars have stopped them or anything. I'm not that clued up on it enough to know that.
So, but I think because obviously they've got the written constitution, haven't they? And whereas ours is just developed through history. It's in there that has to take place, and they're very much about their written document, aren't they?
Yes, they are. You can't deny the fact that the Americans are, great believers in their system of law, and always historically up to this point. Let's hope that this happens here. Is if a lawmaker makes a decision in the states, that the country generally backs it. But that's become partisan in recent times with the Supreme Court. All of a sudden, before 2 or 3 years ago, the majority of people across the world had no idea about which political side the Supreme Court favoured. The mere fact that you have Supreme Court judges and you know their political allegiance tells you that the system is wrong.
And finally, I think your prediction for Trump if he loses, do you think we'll see him again? Stand in for election?
See him again? Well, I would say definitely not going to not see him again because
that's why I added that. Standing.
Let's just remember, he'll just go back. He could just go back to The Apprentice. I mean,
or Miss
to be honest,
or whatever it was that he owned.
To be honest, will we see Trump again? I think the difficult thing for the Republican Party is Trumpism, and the fact that Trump has got. That's very similar to Boris. Trump has got a lot of people supporting and voting for the Republican Party that would have never have done so before.
Yeah.
But he's also turned off a lot of people that would have been staunchly Republican and only voted Republican before. So I think the Republican Party's got a real issue, a real massive issue. And that will depend, I think, if he loses, which it looks like, if he loses and Biden wins, I think Biden's first 2 years of the presidency will probably dictate what happens with Trump. If Biden takes it down a less centrist route and a more left-leaning route, then that almost opens the door for somebody, a populist leader like Trump, to be standing again in 2024.
Yeah.
I don't know if in American politics we've ever had a losing person stand again. I don't know enough about it, but certainly if he takes a centrist route, Biden, then it doesn't really leave much room for Trump, and that probably means you'll have a more centrist Republican stand. But let's remember that the reason that Trump and Biden are in the positions that they're in at the moment, as in standing for presidency, is because there's a real dearth of any decent opposition to them. Realistically, neither of them should have won their nominations to become the candidate. I mean, Biden, regardless of what your politics are, Biden is like a dead man walking. I mean, it's just waste of time. He's just everything that turns people off politics recently. He's a career politician that in his 50 years as a politician has done some horrendously bad things. Yeah. And it's almost as though they've let him do this as a thank you. Does anybody really expect that if he wins his fourth year of his term as presidency, he'll be 82 years old? Does anybody really expect that he's going to wield power and respect? He's doddery enough now. Forget about his politics, putting aside his politics. But it's the same with Trump. How on earth could Trump win back? The thing about American politics, to me, which has been the thing that has always interested me, has been the fact that when a person is declared president, the whole country gets behind them. They usually, up until Trump, they've loved their president. So when Obama won, Republicans who didn't vote for Obama will be behind Obama.
Yeah.
Same with Clinton, same with George Bush, same with Reagan. That's how the American politics works. They love their president. And unfortunately, this has changed this, and I hope that it doesn't have that long-term effect. I think they've picked two such weird and wonderful candidates in Biden and Trump that they're almost splitting the people down the middle, and they won't be able to get back to where they were before.
But it's interesting. It's interesting to see that it's similar to us. So in terms of this whole cult of personality and populism and that kind of stuff, which has hit us, let's face it, has hit them as well at very similar times. So it's very bizarre that this has happened, and I find it quite alarming of what our future is in politics, full stop.
Well, let's a
cult of personality. We had it with Corbyn, we've got it to a degree with Boris. Trump, what's the future for countries like ours?
You can say populism, but people use the word populism and almost use it as a dirty word. But really, what populism means really is giving the country what the country wants. Because to call it populism is really to say the majority of the population want it. So is that wrong?
Or it's chasing the idea of being popular. But let's be honest, the country. I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is what's best for the country and what the country want are two completely different things sometimes.
Well, and again, my personal opinion is that's a really dangerous statement, because you're almost saying that what the people want is not important. It's more important what the country needs. But what the country needs, surely, is what the people want. You can trace back populism away, realistically, what's happening in Western politics, and you can say that Macron was elected as a populist leader. Can't remember his name, Matteo somebody in Italy, one of those head of the 5-star movement. He was elected as a populist leader. The West has really experienced, and what, if you can remember back to what people called the Arab Spring, when lots of long-established political dynasties were overthrown in countries like Egypt and Tunisia and everything like that, and they had popular uprisings. The West is now experiencing that. Is populism a bad thing, or is populism just giving the people what they want? And isn't that what politics is supposed to be about?
Well, politics is about people, but, we've seen this with a few subjects, that we elect people to represent us, but not only in opinion, but because we trust in them that they will do what's best for us. Otherwise, why do we not just have an online system whenever there's a policy, we all just vote on it? And we all just constantly...
So they do. So there's a country in the world that happens. Switzerland is a country, I think there's 28 cantons in Switzerland. They have a large number of referenda each year, because whenever there's a big thing that their country has to decide, it goes to a referendum. It works for them, but they're a relatively small country that doesn't have a lot of inequalities. It works. It wouldn't work everywhere else. I just think there's danger. To me, the word and the term populism is used by people to denigrate what people actually want. It's almost used as a sneering way of the establishment to say, Brexit is a fine example.
Oh, you've gone.
Populist policy. Sorry?
No, you're back.
I would say Brexit, was one because it was sold to us as a populist policy. It wasn't. It's not. It's what the country voted for. So that's what should happen. So getting back to the original question, this is somebody like Trump doesn't disappear into the ether overnight. We have to remember that Trump has been been at the forefront of everything for years and years and years and years and years. So, even if he doesn't stay in politics, he's going to use his ex-president tag for years to come. Is that a bad thing? No, I don't think it's a bad thing. They all do it. Clinton didn't disappear off the world stage. Obama didn't. Tony Blair gets his face around more countries now than what he ever did when he was president.
Well, Theresa May does it. Has a good gig as well now, doesn't she?
Tony Blair's a fine example. Yeah, well, because Tony Blair is leading what you'd call the Great Reset, as it were. He's the one going around the world trying to tell all countries to have this Great Reset. But is Trump dangerous? He's only dangerous if you don't agree with what he wants.
Mm. Now, I think if he loses, which he probably has, he will duck out of politics. But yeah, it certainly won't be the last we see of him.
One of the problems is with this, if Trump loses, is that one of the weird things about this system is it's almost like who's got the best lawyers, because their system is so open to abuse and holes that if you were a good arguer, a good lawyer, you could almost win an election for your candidate, whether they got more votes than the other party or not. Because it seems to me at the moment is that what the lawyers are doing is they're not trying to insist that all the votes are counted. They're trying to insist that lots of the votes aren't counted. I think a lot of the lawsuits surround things like when ballots are allowed to be counted. We can't discount this load of ballot. We can't count this load of ballots because they turned up then, type of thing. Yeah. So if you've got a good legal team around you, you can it seems to me with the American way is that you can win an election by losing an election, but having the better legal team.
Well, we shall see who's got the better legal team.
We shall see. Do you know what? There's part of me, I don't mind Trump, but there's part of me that wants Trump to win just to see all these sneering people, because there's a lot of people that sneer at the likes of Trump and Cummings. all these sneering people have to eat their words again, because at the end of the day, the court holds more power in America than it does in most countries. So, and Trump isn't doing anything that different to what previous presidents have done. I don't believe George Bush conceded defeat. Well, he didn't actually lose in the end, did he? He won. Yeah. And I don't believe that Al Gore, who was parading around as president-elect for 30-odd days, I don't believe that anybody cast him in a bad light at all, or anybody cast George Bush in a bad light. Actually, Trump is Trump, isn't he? He's pissed off that many people that people will say or do anything that's against him.
Politics is so divisive right now.
Interesting times.
Interesting times. Right, well, as ever, it's been a pleasure.
Yeah, pleasure's all yours.
Yeah.